Hey everyone, welcome to the Man Talk podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our favorite YouTube channels. So, what prefaced this podcast was basically, both Jacob and I like to watch a lot of YouTube and specifically content geared towards improving ourselves and our lives. So, we figured with this podcast we would highlight a couple of those channels and just talk about why these specific channels are worth your viewing as well. So, I think one of the main channels that both Jacob and I agree is probably one of the best channels on YouTube at the moment would have to be Jordan Peterson's, and Jacob's going to explain initially why that is.
So Jordan Peterson is a big figure in the last 2 years. He's really risen to prominence, mostly through the book 12 Rules for Life. There's another book he wants to write too, if I'm not mistaken. He got hit with a pretty big illness, so I think that's been delayed. But other than that, 12 Rules for Life already, and all of the lectures and talks and tours he's done in the last 2 years have made it to YouTube. Different debates like the Monk debates, debating Kathy Newman on Channel 4 News, to the GQ interview, which was my personal favorite, and how to deal with somebody who's extremely irritating for an hour and a half and still have the stamina and confidence to remain in the conversation, in the dialogue, ready to go.
So, who is Jordan Peterson?
So he's a clinical psychologist, Julian. In fact, we've even got a couple podcasts we've done on his book for Rules 2 through 4 and Rule 8.
Yep.
One of them being tell the truth or at least don't lie for Rule 8. Measure how you're doing yesterday versus how you're comparing yourself today, versus trying to compare to someone else's worldview and their life, which is Rule 4. Make friends that want the best for you for 3. All of those are part of his book, and we go into some detail on that in a podcast, I think 4 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a clinical psychologist that has been a prominent figure ever since the Bill C-16 that came out 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, that made it to YouTube, went viral, and there was one video after the next on this guy. And for me, personally, the guy showed up on my YouTube feed around January 2018, and he just had this amazing 7 to 10 minute video on just getting your life together and what suffering's about. And yeah, suffering's going to be part of life. Try and remove the stuff that's not necessary, or at least the suffering that can be removed. Be strong, keep going forward. And he had a really good message there about Christianity and how it's useful still to this day on bearing your cross and picking up your suffering and being strong enough for others. All that, you just don't hear that very often. So this guy is actually living it, doing it, saying it, thinking it, helping other people think that way too. So
yeah. For me, Peterson really resonates in terms of the self-improvement aspect of your life. So essentially, he always says that the smallest unit of society is the individual, and if the individual can sort his own life out, then that directly benefits the rest of society. And that can range from just facing all the dragons under your bed to just dealing with all the problems in your life before you start to try to take on the world's problems. And I feel like, especially in 2020, that's a very pivotal comment to make on individuals in our society. And it's resonated with me because I've always held the belief to some capacity that yes, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for myself, and if I can better my own life, then everyone else's life around me will also better. So at least on that note, whenever I listen to Peterson speak on topics of like self-determination and self-help, I'm always like, yes, this resonates within me very deeply. And for other people, I would assume if you're more of I can pull myself up by the bootstraps, or at least know who to ask for help if need be, then that should resonate with you as well.
Yeah, you even mentioned Rule 6. That was the don't try and judge the world until you clean up your room. And that to me was just as important as compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to somebody else's today. And all that was in a book for, what was it, like $16 that came out? I was surprised, like $16 for that. And I hate reading, okay? I hate reading. I legit would rather just watch a YouTube video. This guy actually made me pick up this book and read it over twice. So I was surprised. I was enthusiastically surprised.
Yeah, I supplemented my hatred for reading, because I also hate reading, with listening to the audiobook, which he personally narrates.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
I got myself an audio version of 12 Rules for Life, and I listened to it. And especially with audiobooks, as a lot of listeners would know, you can speed up the language, speed up the pace of the audio. Same with YouTube, you can speed up the videos. So you can just absorb more information per second than you normally would listening to normal paced audio. So that's usually what I do for all podcast-oriented YouTube videos in general. It's just so, okay, I can really retain the information a lot quicker than if I just picked up a book.
Yeah, and with all that considered with Jordan Peterson, what was the other concepts you liked about his work and what he's been doing with helping people, young people, people with children, all that kind of thing?
So yeah, it's great that he's actually both a professor of psychology and then a clinical psychologist. Because on both those fronts, he actually has the practical application of what he's talking about, so he can see what helps his clients out the most. A good example of this is whenever he talks about facing your fears. His recommendation, and he's talked about this in his lectures on YouTube, is essentially you have to confront your fears head on until they're not, you don't fear them anymore, really. And until you really do that, until you can confront them, they, hold themselves over you and beat you down and deflate you like a defeated lobster in the bottom of the ocean, So that specific critique of, okay, confront your fears, overcome them, scale a mountain, so to speak, also really resonated with me when I heard it.
And for me, that's another rule 1, about the lobsters thing, right?
Yeah.
And he actually tries to help people. He's a genuine human being. So
Yes.
Any genuine human being on the internet, I'm probably going to be looking him up, because you want people like that. You want someone that actually cares, and cares enough to push the envelope on, here, this is your responsibility for what it takes to make your life meaningful and make others benefit. And I couldn't see it any other way from a genuine perspective.
And on that note, the genuine nature of Peterson, he has flaws. He's a real human being. He's not like a saint or anything like that by any means. And to see that a human being can go through trial and tribulations as well gives a certain perspective on, okay, well, he also has his dragons and demons to confront, but despite that, he still puts himself out there to help people and help them in whatever capacity he can,
The other thing I liked about him is he has a tendency to make sure that people deal with their own problems. So in a clinical practice, that's amazing, because he's not necessarily a therapist. He's getting them to allow space for them to work on their problems, which is so different than typical therapy, which is they work on you, and then, oh, thanks, doc, I'm all patched up. Then you come back screaming 3 months later because another problem showed up. And he doesn't do that. He actually gives them the means to work on their own problems. And that's great, because that means it can be automated. At that point, that human being can start fixing their own stuff. And when they need to come back for that space to help fix it, it's constructive. It's not just going in and, oh, my leg broke and now I'm going to go get it fixed. Now it's, wow, there's 50% of this job I can do myself now.
Yeah.
Where before it was 0, which is a big improvement. I mean, he went from nothing to some. That's great. That's what he does.
Yeah, a good visualization of that is in terms of knowledge. When you fill it with fill a vessel of water, or spark the fire within. Pearson's more of the spark the fire within, so that you ignite whatever capacity you have for yourself to help yourself, right? As opposed to just filling you with information and hoping that you retain it. It's a big distinction.
It is, and he does still do the other method, which is filling the vase. It's just keep it in perspective. You don't want things that you should be doing yourself to be filled like a vase. Instead, that should be more of your own motivation. But for the things that I am at my limit, I can't find it, I need somebody else to give me a hand, that's where he gives you the hand. You now have a vessel that's been filled, he gives you the spark, and now you can go back, versus just being stuck and always being asking for help. And I really like that about Jordan. And he does that with his family too. Yeah. He does it with his friends. He does it with people on tour. An impartial, genuine human being, but I wish we could have more of, and I'm hoping we would, because I'm getting sick and tired of the modern day culture saying that our humanity doesn't matter that much. We're all just kind of the same, and we just kind of came from nowhere, and people just blindly believe it. And he challenges all those ideas and instead points you in the direction of going up. And about time we finally get to see this rise of competence and confidence, knowledge, and happiness too. I mean, I think that it's legit joy from being able to solve your own problems.
Yeah, Peterson's really the antidote to nihilism. He provides a framework to his listeners and people who take his classes or take his clinical psychology practice seriously, for just providing all those people, oh, okay, well, you're going to have issues in your life and you're going to try to overcome them, but I lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's long-form discussion. That's all right.
Yes, yeah.
What he does also that I really like is it's not just about defeating nihilism.
True.
He'll bring forth his thoughts in the dialogue. He'll say, this is what I'm thinking, and it's an honest assessment. Here's the data I'm seeing. And he'll bring it to as a presentation, so people feel, okay, I get to see what he's thinking. A lot of people nowadays have a tendency to shield that, and it makes them look like they're powerful. But what he does is says, I'm going to test this idea like an Iron Man argument, versus the straw man, which is how he keeps all those interviews. They keep straw manning him, and he keeps going, well, let's test the ideas to the point where I can't break them. Maybe those are the ones we should be relying on, instead of these ones where it's all about deception and making my enemy look bad. I push him down, it makes me look a little better. Maybe for that guy, but then there'll be 10 other people you got to do that to, 100 people. He has an efficient way with ideas, and he'll bring up those ideas, how we got there, the proof, the data, and he'll just bring it up. And I think that's genuine. Yeah. Not enough people do that. Every news article I keep seeing, I don't want to trust it. I have a tendency to say that's garbage because they didn't do all of their homework. And here's this guy, this clinical psychologist who just came out of nowhere on YouTube. He's demonstrating every line to what he's doing. And he even say, now I could be full of crap, but listen to me out on this. And he'll question his own self to the point where, is the idea strong enough? And if it's not, then maybe we should change it. But he has tested it for so long that you can't really push a lot of his ideas down, which is why his book resonated with me so much. And that's another plus to Jordan. But a lot of these ideas he didn't come up with. A lot of them came from our ancestors. It was the way he framed them and is teaching them and living them, I think, is what makes Jordan Peterson who he is versus just he came up with all his ideas himself. No, I think he tested them and he found ways to give people that means to see it where they couldn't see it before. So that's my 2 cents on JP.
Yeah, and just to finish that off on Peterson, essentially, especially his course lectures, I've learned a lot about psychology and topics that aren't really covered in the mainstream, like IQ or just the big 5 personality traits that we all have. And it's like, oh, that's extremely important information for everybody to know, yet it's downplayed or noted as irrelevant for the most part. And it's great to see, like, okay, well, at least he's not, shoving that down and then promoting essentially falsehoods because that sounds nicer. It's the actual data. There's proof behind it. So another thing I appreciate about Peterson is his Understand Myself and Self-Authoring suite. So for the Understand Myself, it's the big 5 personality aspects that everybody has: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Everybody has different percentages in terms of, oh, you're extremely neurotic or you're extremely stable, for example. And depending on how your percentages stack up, it basically tells you, okay, well, I'm more of a person who is industrious and a go-getter, or I'm more of a disorganized person. How do I navigate life given that personality attribute? And then with the self-offering suite, if you do both of them, Understand Myself and self-authoring, it's more or less like a guided journaling, guided diarying. So basically you can use that to try to, contextualize your life in your own words, using and breaking apart your life into epochs of different important events. And it's self-guided for the most part. And for me, when I did it, it was very useful to just kind of, I wouldn't say compartmentalize, but better to flesh out different attributes of my life and to make sure, okay, this is my understanding of it. Is there any additional information or knowledge that I need to glean from it? So both of those are things that Peterson has worked on and has implemented in his own private clinical research and professorship, and it's been very helpful for me specifically. Have you done them? Have they been helpful for you?
So I did not the Understand Myself, but I did the self-authoring, because he kept talking about self-authoring, and I go, how good is it? Well, the future self-authoring is really what it's known for.
Yeah.
Which, the future self-authoring, that's allowing you to look into the future, and it'll ask you to write for 2 to 3 minutes on where you see yourself in 5 years, or what kind of goals do you want to have, what kind of life do you want to have, and it forces you to write that stuff down. And he encourages you to do it badly, which I really liked, because, okay, well, I can do it badly. Sure, anyone can do it badly. I can do that. So doing it badly was a first start, and I could argue I did it when I wasn't as quality control driven on what I would wrote. And that's kind of the idea, so that way you can look at it and go, that's terrible. Let me write something better than that, and then you could. So I never did the second iteration, but after looking at the first, I go, oh, I can do better than that. And that's allowed me to help journal some of my own ideas out and project for some of the other things I want to do to have life go in the proper manner. So one of them being the inventory project. We've actually both done an inventory project. This has helped with making sure you don't have a cluttered life. So having a cluttered life has a tendency to, you're forced to just always be looking at your objects versus actually living your life. They should be your extensions, not a burden. So that was one idea I had from self-authoring, and I go, that would be awesome if things could just be tools and useful without them being a burden. And that was liberating after that, because now I can just keep track of all my stuff without it consuming me, which a lot of people, it seems like they're just always bouncing around their stuff. So anyway, yeah, how was the Understand Myself?
Just a straightforward. I've taken variations of the test before, but they're not necessarily like backed by clinical research. And it more or less gives out the same like knowledge in terms of where you fall under the ocean, 5 personality perspective or traits. For me personally, it's since it's a self-assessment, you tend, at least for me, I tend to be harder on myself than other people. So personally, I found it useful just, confirming on things where I need to work on, like being more conscientious with how I organize things, like with the inventory stuff, or just being a little bit less agreeable with how I interact with people so I don't get walked over. And then acknowledging that I'm not very neurotic in terms of how I handle experiences. And it's more or less things I personally already knew, but it's still good to verify and work on things that I want to improve. Like, I should be more conscientious or industrious so I can like start my own business or be more of a go-getter, because that's what I want to become. So it gives you the baseline, and then you can chart out where you want to go with that. So with both Understand Myself and Self-Authoring Street, those have been great helps for me specifically, and I wouldn't have known about it if I didn't, initially bump into Peterson on YouTube. So he's definitely a great channel to check out and highly recommend him. Same with Jacob, I would assume.
100%. I mean, we gave him a pretty good shout out in the first 20 minutes, so
yeah,
I'm pretty excited that he's still there. Last I heard, he's recovering, still kind of just keeping an easier life, kind of.
Yeah, getting himself back up to his baseline.
As he should. I mean, the guy ran himself essentially like mad for 2 years straight.
Yeah, on his press tours and his flying, and just it's pretty crazy schedule to manage.
And he did it because he felt needed. So he goes, okay, well, I feel needed. I'll do what I can as an agreeable person, because he actually is on the agreeable side, believe it or not. And he helped out millions. I mean, it was great. Anyone from Australia, USA, Europe, went all over the place. And he influenced Jocko, which we can talk about later in the podcast. Before we get to him, I want to ask you about Scott Adams.
Yes. So
you've talked about him a lot.
Yeah.
In previous conversations. And I never really understood where you were getting these ideas from. And then you told me it was this guy. So feel free to dive right into Scott Adams.
It's kind of funny that when I first told Jacob about Scott Adams and he checked him out, he said it was eerily creepy how similar the two of us were in terms of our disposition and how we like talk to each other.
The quote was, "Are you two best friends?"
Yeah, maybe he could be my father. Who knows? But the reasoning for that is Scott Adams is the creator of Dilbert, so that's kind of an atypical source of favorite YouTube channels like Dilbert. Dilbert's just a comic strip about how management works in a large corporation, right? How could the person who created that have any like insight into life? But I started watching his periscopes on YouTube because he would post those after he would do the live periscope. And he was doing them daily for some reason. In his own words, he gets a lot out of it in terms of working through his own ideas and then presenting it in front of an audience. But basically, in Coffee with Scott Adams, which is the name of his show, I guess, through Periscope, he picks topics of the day, news, all that stuff, or just like topics that he's interested in, like his talent stack idea, and he discusses it for a general audience. And then he works through how, okay, this is a good example of persuasion from a political perspective or from a news perspective. Or this is a good example for how you should orient your life towards things that you want to accomplish rather than focusing on ideas that make you depressed. And I guess the biggest takeaway that I get from all of his presentations is I get to see his metric, his methodology for working through problems and trying to cut through like various pitfalls in our psychology. Because as someone who he himself says he learned persuasion, he went to like a school that taught it, and basically, this is how people try to persuade you. Some people might use the word manipulate, and then this is how you navigate that. whether it be through faulty arguments, bad uses of cognitive dissonance, bad uses of Dunning-Kruger effect, all these different like psychological concepts, all in the vein of, okay, well, beware of these. This is how you can utilize it if you want to try to get the best out of your own existence, but not necessarily in a nefarious way. More in a, okay, this is how I'm gonna like run a business, for example. These are the skills you need for that, whether it be, okay, how to have a conversation with people, how to connect with people, how to better navigate through contentious waters. So with all the podcasts or episodes that Scott Adams does, it's always very insightful in terms of, okay, so he's a very methodical thinker. He breaks it down and then goes through each of how he would do it. Did you notice that in a few episodes that you've watched of him?
So he's definitely got a method, which it's nice to see a method to how he's communicating with people.
System.
Yeah, and he talks about systems versus goals,
Yep.
which, yeah, we'll do that shout out for him because that's really important. Because
Yes.
I saw that going, why don't we do more of this?
Right.
If we make a better system, you can have a better goal to shoot for, instead of just saying we're going to make $1 billion, and then you're scrambling, and then you're always running at peak capacity.
Yep.
Which, why? I mean, that to me, you're asking for dissent. You're asking for people to get riled up about that sort of thing. And the amount of time you're probably going to end up wasting, I mean, he's worked in an office, which I really appreciate, because he'll know when people come up with bad ideas that people have to implement. And he got the water cooler talk, because people don't like it. And they're going to voice their opinion with their break. They'll say, this is ridiculous. I don't appreciate this kind of value or goal. We're not going to get there. And there's probably some kind of unforeseen issues we're going to run into along the way that he will also come up with. And this is, of course, in terms of a bad boss. And I'm going, yeah, you see that a lot, especially in the operations world. And you're wasting all kinds of time just from that. But if you have a better system and everyone's worried about, how do we make sure the system maintains optimal flow? Do we have the safeguards in place to continue to move forward? The goal now can become more realizable, and it's less on the goal itself now. I mean, the goal could just be a goal post.
Right.
Just there's 50 million, 100 million, 150 million, doesn't matter. Not really, but we have the capacity for 120 million right now. Do we want to get to 150? Yeah, but we don't have the system to get there yet. Let's do X, Y, and Z in our new plan for corporate year, fiscal year 2021. And now we've got something that is just a goal post, and we have a system to get there.
Right. Although Scott Adams hates analogies, I'll use an analogy here just to give it a visual component, because he does like visual explanations for things. You can imagine the system versus goals paradigm as like a structure of a building, right? The actual physical beams and all the stuff covered up by the drywall and whatever is your system. It actually maintains the building and keeps it from falling down. Whereas you could think of the goals as the facade, everything that covers up the structure and makes sure that everything is just looks nice. But although it looks nice, it's not necessarily functional. It doesn't actually play a part in keeping the building up. So when you think of a system versus a goal, you want to focus more on, okay, this is the process of how we're going to get to whatever outcome we desire. And when people initially start a goal, they don't necessarily think about that process, and that creates a very poor foundational starting point. Because if you just have the goal in mind, like, I'm going to pass this test, okay, but how? And without that how, or at least working through that how, more likely than not, you won't have that system, that process in place to pass that test. And that's where you have to really sit down and start thinking methodically to yourself, okay, these are the steps I'm going to take to pass the test. And then as a result of my system and my ability to study and following the structure that I laid out, I will pass the test, because why wouldn't you at that point?
And again, it's the incremental progress that is going to drive you forward, because you've decided that every day you will have something that's bringing you closer towards that. But the system itself, I mean, I love the facade thing you said, because a facade's only going to have so much weight that it can bear, and it's not going to be anything close to steel rebar and concrete. I mean, now you're looking at some of the nice wood they've got on the sides of the wall, or they've got some kind of expensive coating, but that's not going to hold up the actual building where the business is being done.
Yep.
And to me, that's enough said that right there. So
yeah, and just to build on that a little bit though, with when you're considering the whole functionality of a system, me personally, the way I kind of orient my life, if an object or a thing that I need doesn't have a utility to it, then it kind of puts a back burner. I'm not very much in terms of aesthetics or how things look. I'm more so of how things work and how I can utilize it as a tool in my tool chest of things that I can use to better improve my life. Across the board, whether it's from studying in school to just buying products like a phone or a camera, I'm always looking at the functionality, not the design per se. Design's important, but it's not the most important. And if you get lost in that paradigm of, oh, I want this to physically look good, then you might be compromising your functionality or what you can actually do with it. On that same note, when Scott Adams talks about the idea of the talent stack. So a talent stack is just all of your skills that you've accrued over time, incrementally, of course, because you're not born a savant, right? You're not born with all the skills that you need to succeed in life. You have to slowly learn everything at incremental steps until by the time you're in your 30s, 40s, or even older, you have all these different skills across all these different domains that all interfeed and connect to each other. And from a systems versus goal perspective, you might not see the utility of learning like carpentry when you're like a teenager in your 20s. But hey, maybe when you have a house and you're 30 or 40, having those carpentry skills, having that basic ability around tools will come greatly in hand with remodeling a home that you might buy. Or just any of these little skills that you can learn, like filmmaking or photography or writing or interpersonal communication. All these things build and synergize with each other, and it's not like siloed off knowledge.
And that actually goes the same for this podcast, so which I really dig. So Julian, for those who don't know, Julian got me into getting a camera and figuring out how this stuff works a little more, and I had nothing. I mean, you could probably, Jake, take a picture on a smartphone. Okay, it's going to be bad. Click. And now it's, okay, this is how you set up a tripod. This is how you set up a video camera, how you check for microphones and video quality, and for all these things for when you're talking to somebody. And you'd be happy, actually, that came in handy a couple nights ago, because somebody I was talking to had their webcam mic on. And I noticed that it sounded different. I go, can you check? And sure enough, it was the webcam mic. And that's happened to me for a long time, but I didn't have that's nuance.
Technical foundation.
Yeah, maybe the foundation to notice that. But now it's part of who I am. Instruments. I was a big instrumentalist when growing up with being a trumpet player. That helped out in understanding rhythm. So yeah, aesthetics aren't important, but by God, if you can make it clean and organized, and it looks not perfect, but if it looks just good, that's a lot better than it looks amazing, but its functionality sucks and it's not organized. So I just say put it on the priority list as lower, but if you can make it organized and clean, by God, I'll take a good camera that's organized, clean, can do the functionality, reliable, versus it looks awesome, but it can sometimes tweak out if you're not running it at a day that's 78 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. And just on that note, just the whole concept of the talent stack, or just learning different skills, at least for me personally, it's never a bad idea to learn something new, right? I have a few friends back in my hometown who are very like skittish or scared or teaching themselves a new concept. They rather pay someone else to do it because they don't necessarily have the time, which is a fair argument. But always from my perspective, I've always tried to put myself in a situation where, can I do it on my own? Yes? Okay, what do I need to do? Watch a few YouTube videos? Got it. I can do that pretty easily. Can I retain the information and execute it appropriately? Cool. Okay, so this is what I need to do. And with all those little learning modules, you can think of it like that I picked up over time, I've become much more handsy and much more useful to other people, like Jacob mentioned, with helping people out with technical problems. Because especially when you work on the baby technical problems, once you've been working around like computers, tech, audio all your life, you start to get into these situations where, okay, this is a novel problem. How do I face it? And then you think back on your previous experiences, and then you bring it to the table, and then 99% of the time, I would argue, once you've built up that baseline mastery, you can solve it and no issues.
I think the harder part, though, is trying to make sure, do I have the problem framed right? So engineering, we did so much on calculations. So problems been pre-framed so much. And in the real world, you really got to figure out what is the actual problem. If getting it framed right is probably even harder than that. And more likely, it's what you need to do first. So once you have the frame right, and in terms of the context of, oh, okay, someone's mic's not working properly, maybe there's something wrong with the computer, what have we tried resetting? Those kind of questions start popping up, and you go, okay, now I can think of a strategy, a plan A and maybe even a plan B on how to deal with what's going on in the problem. And then you can start actually doing something about it versus just, I don't know what to do, I'm scared, I would rather not deal with this right now, and I'm just not going to do it. And some people just blow it off, and they say, okay, well, I'm not skilled enough, or I don't want to do it, or I'm too frustrated. And I used to be like that a lot more. I remember with it was with some games even. I'm going, this game's too hard. I'm not going to play it.
Yeah, and then last note on learning things specifically. Once you start to learn the intricacies of how all these different things work, you do have less anxiety. You do have less anger towards your machines because you understand how they work. And you get into little intricacies, and it's really not a large problem to overcome. But it does take time and patience and practice, definitely practice. And again, with talent stack, once you accrue that skill over time, again, it's not in one day, you'll be able to address a lot of problems that come your way, and you'll be multifaceted, which is a lot better than just having one tool in your toolkit.
So now that we've talked about Scott Adams, can we bounce back to Jay Shetty?
Yep.
So I really wanted to talk about Jay. He's been one of the, not leading people on YouTube, but just one of the genuine people that I've been able to find lately. He's this ex-monk character that looked at life and was going, I want to try and get a life of purity. I want to figure out what's going on in modern day, how to understand myself. And he's going along this journey. And once he's done, he goes, now I need to take this and bring it to people who need to have peace in their life. Because a lot of people in modern day don't have joy. They don't have peace. Their life runs them, not the other way around. And he wanted to give them some covering fire, so to speak. So he's a countercultural guy. He's not really into the health and wealth thing. He does say take care of yourself, do make enough money to take care of what you need to do, but don't try and find your happiness in those things. Instead, find happiness by being the best you can be with whatever you're given. And that is essentially taking the investments that's been put into you through society and trying to move it along.
What would you say is like the the biggest takeaway you've had from listening to his videos or podcast?
The biggest takeaway for me is that be genuine with people. Don't be afraid to put your ideas out there and let them be crushed. You know, that a lot of people just want to have that good idea. They get emotionally attached to it. They don't want anyone to hurt it. But what someone does in a sense of a genuine person, they allow for legit criticism. Because in order to be genuine, it needs to take any criticism. Any. And I appreciated that about the guy, because so many people just think they have to have a perfect facade, and that's just not how life works. So he says, no, put your ideas out there, let them be tested. Don't do the straw man thing. Take care of people, love them. Pretty basic stuff. It's just he's trying to put it into practice on the internet, and he's civil, so easy to get along with. Allows for space for people to open up and think. So many people don't do that either. And Jordan Peterson does some of the same stuff Jay's doing. But in his case, he's getting some other high leading figures like Dr. Daniel Amen or Lindsey Sterling, the famous violinist, on his podcast to allow them to have that space. And now other people can help others too.
Just on a note on being genuine, it makes for a lot of social easing, I guess, when you're in a group and people realize, like, oh, this person's not beating around the bush. They're not being blunt per se, but they're just putting themselves out there as who they are. And hopefully you're in a group where other people can also put themselves out there and be who they are. And you can not necessarily with full judgment or criticism, but understand where each other's coming from. So that's great that with Jay that he comes off as extremely genuine, and I'm assuming it was learned. It wasn't something you were just born with.
That's kind of where the monk thing came in, right? Because it forced him. So for the first half of his day, he would have quiet time, peace, meditation, no talking, nothing. So you have to deal with your mind. It forces you to deal with you. And then the next half is when you're dealing with all the other monks. So now that everyone's been thoroughly calibrated by meditation and getting themselves in a peaceful mindset, now that they can go and treat their neighbor properly.
Right.
And that's great, but not everyone's got that kind of time. Not everyone's a monk. So what he did was, it goes, okay, let's change the game. Let's get on YouTube. Let's find a way to he does make a business out of it for what it's worth. I mean, he is a YouTube guy. I mean, he's got like 5 million subscribers or something.
Oh, wow.
So maybe 3.5 last I checked, but he's like on verge for 5. And the guy is trying to get that message across instead of sending, get everything you possibly can now, travel the world, step on whoever you need to step on because nothing matters anyway. He's super he's not nihilistic, which is where the culture's leaning right now. And he brings in people like Dr. Daniel Amen, who's this brain doctor, and this guy resonates with Jay because he's saying every move you do is affecting your brain. Every move. Now your brain can recover and it can be repaired. It can be directed, but keep in mind, whether it's the food you eat, with the people you associate with, the drugs you do, all those things that amount to your life, the way you sleep, it contributes to your brain health, and you can prove it with SPECT imaging, which that's the part that's the game changer. You can just look it up on Google Images and click on his SPECT scans and see what people with drug abuse looks like, alcohol, not sleeping right, eating junk food, putting them all together, and that by itself is cool because you can just, there it is, there's the scan, there's the loss in blood flow, and that explains why his prefrontal cortex doesn't fire on all cylinders. And now you can look at some of the other people who have healthy brains and you go, okay, what are they doing? And you go, okay, they're eating right, they're sleeping right, they're getting enough water, they find social behaviors that are healthy. And it's just the big message for getting people like Daniel on the podcast is lifestyle choices impact your brain and they impact your life, and it's going to cause the direction to swing one way or the other. So I'm glad you mentioned the learning thing, the lifelong learning, when we were talking about Scott Adams, because If you don't, your brain has a tendency to say, okay, this is all I need to know, and it just slowly shrinks in on itself, as opposed to maintaining this healthy muscle of a brain that people have with like reading or learning new things.
And that really comes into focus how you have to still continually push yourself so that you're not stagnating or your brain's not atrophying. And education can do that, but also just, exercise, working out can help keep all of your muscles and basically organs working properly. Because without those, especially with sleep, if you have sleep deprivation, you're pretty useless. Did you want to talk a little bit about Jocko? Because he would be a great impetus for pushing yourself and getting yourself into it.
Jocko Willink. This guy, so what makes him different is that he likes to push the boundaries. And what I mean by pushing boundaries is he pushes the physical and mental boundaries that a human being can take to bear the suffering of what's going on, and whether it's the work life, military life, home life, whatever. And he loves to push exercise. Exercise. On his Instagram, he's always posting 4:30, on his watch, and he'll take a photo of it, put it on Instagram. And as much as I'm not going to get up at 4:30, I do appreciate the get a rucksack on, find a way to stay healthy, do burpees, do push-ups, keep going. He'll even say things like, your brain is thinking that it's done, but really you're only 40% there. And when you know something like that, you are now going to be aware to your body's calibrations of, okay, my body says it's not enough, I can keep going, to, wow, my body says I'm done, I can't do it. Actually, you can do a little more than you think. Try again. And then that's how you get stronger, is overcoming what your brain thinks is possible. So by pushing those boundaries, it actually pushes your mental and physical capacity, and that actually makes you stronger, and you can get through life.
I have a quick aside to this. One of my former coworkers, he works in the Air Force. He, as a hobby, has taken up ultra marathon running. So he was telling me about going on a 24-hour run, 104 miles of just running on an island off the coast, near the coast of Madagascar, where his wife's from. And essentially, they have that every year. Maybe it'd be postponed now due to COVID. But the general idea is, wow, you're going to run for a whole day, 104 miles, different altitudes, because there's like the beach, and then you're going up a mountain that's on the island, and then coming back down, and then you might do it again, because you have to get to 104 miles somehow. But when I was listening to that, I was like, wow, I can barely run like 5 miles, and he's running like over 100. What is this? But he's really taken into account the philosophy of what Jocko talks about, essentially. I'm not sure if he listens to Jocko specifically, but the general idea of the military, like you can always wake up earlier, you can always get your exercise in, you can always eat healthier, and be the sharpest mind that you can possibly be. And he's definitely on the health nut thing. He's like a supremely fit and healthy looking person.
And with Jocko, he'll bring in other guests too that are either ex-military, or they've went through horrible suffering, or they've got something to share within his friend group that's really close. Peter Attia being one of them. He's the crazy marathon swimmer, so he'll do a 20-mile swim.
Oh, wow.
Which is, so for me, 3 miles is long. That's long. 3 hours? Are you kidding me? You've got to swim 3 hours. For me, that is a long swim. He is doing 15 hours of swimming. And these are extreme people, right? Not everyone is gonna want to shoot for this. But if you get people incorporate with the idea that you actually can do a lot more than you think you can, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
But you got to do it. There's no easy way around it, and that's what I like. He doesn't sugarcoat either. He says you got to do it. It's gonna suck, and you need to get over it. But when you do, that will have been a lot better than you saying, "Well, I couldn't do any of it." Well, maybe you could do most of it, And then all of a sudden, you went from, I'm going to sit on the couch and I'm not going to do anything, and I'm going to reject exercise and it's not going to be a priority because I'm too busy, to I am able to overcome way more than I thought. I can help people in a way that I couldn't before because I'm stronger now. I'm mentally stronger. I can, in the event somebody's going through hard times, you can stand there and help out and just be a brother to them. Where some people, they don't have a spine for it, and they just say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this. By actually facing your problems, like what Jordan Peterson was talking about, so there's going to be a lot of overlap here, because he and Jordan both talk about slaying the dragons before they get really big, and that's part of it. Being able to get up and get your workouts in anyway. It's really a metaphor for life, and not letting life take you down just because you're a little tired. You get some blood flow, keep going. Find a way to hear a story that's harder than yours so you don't feel as bad about yourself. You can stop feeling sorry for yourself and kind of get on with, yeah, life can be really hard for people. And sometimes there's no real answer why immediately. They may have to figure out at the end of their life why the heck it all went out that way. So it's helped me because I kind of grew up a little spoiled, and you need somebody saying, no, you've got, think about how many other people have suffered in a way that you haven't had to. Find a way to keep being useful. That is your responsibility for having a decent life. If you have a decent life, find a way to be responsible, healthy, strong, help the brokenhearted, help the faint, get people that are weak, and make them stronger.
Yeah, also on that note, to piggyback off of it, just the idea of, okay, anti-nihilism. You can improve. There's really no ceiling besides whatever mental ceiling you might have for yourself. And then even if, say, you have a physical disability or possibly a mental disability, you can still push yourself beyond the limits that you might preconceive for yourself. So, at least for me specifically, just knowing that there's individuals out there who are pushing past their limits, who are overcoming, scaling the mountain, so to speak. What's Jocko? What's his catchphrase?
Get after it.
Yeah.
It's hard to miss.
Who are getting after it, so to speak. It's just very inspirational, and it's just another one of those mental roadblocks that get alleviated when you see, okay, well, they can get after it, why can't I? What's holding me back? What am I fearing?
He's a big, no excuses kind of person, which is why his book, Extreme Ownership, is all about that. His book's about a blue on blue, which means there was friendly fire in a war zone. And there was a big fallout from that, and his leaders were saying who's responsible. And eventually, he asked everyone in his platoon and or in his regiment that he was responsible for, and he said, no, it's my fault. I was in command for this whole thing. It was my fault. And his superiors actually said, you know what? This sucked, but that was a lot better than you just trying to squirm your way out of it. And now, all of a sudden, he's been taking that all over the place with corporate change. That's what he's trying to do. So Echelon Front, that's his company. And he goes to these businesses and he'll try and see what their culture's like, do a recon assessment, and if they want to change it, he'll give them the advice on this is what you need to do. You need to take some ownership on what's going on here. For startups, you can't just have Zoom calls all day. Eventually, people are going to have to come into work and get something done. It's not just going to be 100% planning. And I didn't know that was really a big problem until he started talking about it. And he was talking about how a lot of these companies, they've got all these great ideas and they're pumping themselves up on these calls, but they eventually need to actually execute.
Right. So with that, let's segue to our last YouTube channel that we both enjoy. Joe Rogan Experience, one of the most popular YouTubers, podcasters at the moment. What about Joe that you particularly enjoy, Jacob?
His guests. He definitely gets some good guests. He gets some crazy guests too, but the fact that he has so many of them, you can click on the ones you like and then leave the rest at the door, or you can experiment. What is he, $14.75 now? So he's got 14.75 podcasts, and these are long podcasts. Some of them It could be 4 hours, 3 hours. He can go crazy. Maybe some of them, you got busy guests that only can spare 90 minutes. But he'll get people like, heck, you got Bernie Sanders on there, for crying out loud.
Or Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang.
So there's that political aspect that I like, but there's also the getting the long form discussion out of politics has been one of my main critiques of the soundbite 5 minute everyone's shouting at each other. So that's one thing he helps. He definitely helps with that. There's a few others though. I mean, that's Jordan Peterson on there at least 4 times.
Yep.
Gabrielle Reese. She had some really good advice. Just dealing with family and dealing with modern day life, which is kind of surprising because she's a volleyball chick, and I kind of got blown away by that. But she was so real about, you could think about it this way for a while, but then you'll realize it doesn't pan out, and you need to come up with a stronger way of how to deal with it. And I thought it was really refreshing. So there's a lot of refreshing long form discussion that you can find. Chris Kresser was on there. He's a nutritionist, and Dr. Rhonda Patrick. Both of those give long form discussions to another heated stuff on nutrition. What can we eat? And now you can actually just listen to them instead of reading some article that proves you're right because it was one case study. Even 5 case studies. Some people, they'll have 5 case studies and they'll say, oh, that should be good enough. They'll talk about the meta studies. What is the real answer on top of the food pyramid, which is total garbage, by the way. What about you, Julian? Tell me about some of the Joe Rogan things you like.
Yeah, for Rogan's podcast, I really appreciate the long form, like exceptionally long form podcast format. So 2 to the 4 hour range we're talking. It's just so much content that you can get through in that time. And especially with YouTube, you can, again, put it at 2 times speed and just blast through the podcast and absorb all this information that you wouldn't otherwise get on classical television, right? Because on classical television, you're interrupted with commercials, breaks up the flow of the conversation, and it's just not the same level of depth or discourse that you're going to get with long-form podcasting. And Rogan, again, has some of the best guests, at least from a wide variety of topics. Like, I remember he had on a mushroom guy who was talking about the microbial nature of funguses and all this other stuff. He has physicists on, like Brian Greene or Sean Carroll, talking about quantum mechanics or physics. And then you have like all the health and wellness people too, just how to live your life. It's just a catch-all, all-around, genuine podcast that touches on pop culture, health and wellness, science, and not specifically pop culture again, but comedians. He has a lot of comedian guests on too.
That's his original gang of people. So you're definitely going to see comedians, and you'll also see people like Steve Rinella. He's a hunter. Talk about hunting things, which I'm going, wait, what? This is the guy who wrote that crazy cookbook. He's on there too. Yeah,
exactly. So Rogan, although himself as a personality, at least in my opinion, he's a little more on, not necessarily the type of person that I would hang out with on a daily basis. He does do the interview process and come off as a genuine person. And his ideas, although he's still always curious and learning, that's a good place to be when you're with a guest who has knowledge that you don't necessarily know. And he knows how to ask those questions. I mean, he's done over 1,000 of them, so after that amount of time, he'd become an expert interviewer. And especially when he had Eric Weinstein on, who also has his own YouTube channel, by the way. I almost forgot to mention him. But with Weinstein's ideas, as he presented them both on Rogan and on his own new podcast, The Portal, is very paradigm shifting, very much a different perspective in terms of, okay, this is how we think society's been working since World War II. It's actually more of this expected growth obligation of all these institutions and corporations and hierarchical structures that's essentially unsustainable. And Roegan and Weinstein giving that a platform, at least seeing that grow and manifest itself into, the long form podcasting format is just a treat to listen to. And I don't really want to spoil Weinstein too much because it's really quite amazing just to listen to how he weaves together his hypothesis on how all these institutions are corrupt, from education to government to financial institutions. Just basically the structure of things is quite a treat to listen to. So you should check him out if you're curious on that front.
The good news is we're going to put all these links in the description. So we'll have all the channels we like in the description, and we'll also have some timestamps in there, so that way if you want to check out anything specific in this podcast, you can see it for yourself without having to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you have any other single word call outs you want to give for specific YouTube channels that you particularly like?
Personally, and this is something that people don't usually ask me about, Tim Keller is definitely a guy you should check out if you're interested in how the worldview for Christians has changed in the modern day and how to reconcile that. I'm definitely going to leave his link in the description below. He's in a Redeemer Church in New York City, and it's definitely a good listen to on how to bridge the thoughts and postmodern problems that people have to deal with and combat them with truth and logic. So yeah, I'll put him down below too.
Yeah, and then also a couple shout outs. Brett Weinstein, Eric's brother, he's good for discussions on biology and understanding modern day biological constructs. And then Dave Rubin, Tim Poole, Lex Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Steven Pinker, and Douglas Murray. All of those have been very influential in my understanding of how the world works and how the future should work, in terms of how, we have a modern day paradigm, where should we go from here?
Yeah, man, the madness of crowds for Douglas Murray. Yeah, I remember. So he's the same author, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a lot of these guys. You can even give more Tim Ferriss and some of these other podcast folks that are doing a really slick job on YouTube. But as far as the ones we cover today, I mean, we really wanted to cover Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, rather.
Yeah.
Because those two have probably had some of the biggest impacts on YouTube for long form discussion.
Yep.
So, other than that, though, yeah, I'm pretty much done here. What about you, Julian?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Hopefully check out those recommendations if you haven't heard of specific people or didn't even know that they had YouTube channels. And hopefully you can glean the similar information or even more than what we gathered.
Yeah, and maybe we might even learn from some of the audience. Maybe they'll find a couple more that have some long-form discussions we might want to hear about later, so they can post that in the comments if they ever wanted to.
Yep.
So other than that, everybody, thanks again for watching for Podcast 30. We finally made it to 30. We'll see if we'll make it to 50 here coming up in the next few months. As always, thanks again for watching.
See you, everyone.